You did what? You gave away free food. Hey, get out of here. You're scaring the customers. The manager's sharp voice sliced through the warm hum of the diner. Sarah turned her head just in time to see Dunlap, her boss, waving a frail old man away from the entrance. The man, bundled in layers of tattered clothing, shrank beneath the neon glow of the open sign. His head remained bowed, his thin hands tucked deep inside his sleeves, his shoulders hunched against the bitter cold. He didn't argue, he didn't beg. He simply prepared to disappear, as if he had long accepted rejection as inevitable. Sarah's chest tightened. She had seen this before. The way people averted their eyes, walked past without a second glance, pretended not to notice. She had done it too. It was easier that way. But tonight something inside her refused to let this moment pass. She didn't think. She moved. Wait, she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped forward. The old man flinched, his shoulders tensed as if bracing for another scolding. Dunlap sighed loudly, his patience already thinning. Sarah ignored them both. Sir, would you like to come inside? Her voice was soft but steady. The man lifted his head slightly, his pale, tired eyes searching hers. He hesitated. Then in a voice so weak she almost didn't hear it, he whispered, I don't have any money. Sarah smiled. This one's on me. A long pause, then slowly his shoulders sagged in quiet surrender. She reached out, studying him as he took an unsteady step forward. His body was frail, his movements cautious, as though he expected someone to stop him at any moment. The diner fell silent. A couple near the window exchanged glances. A man at the counter, mid-bite, lowered his burger. Someone in the back muttered under their breath. A young woman discreetly pulled out her phone, tapping record. Sarah pretended not to notice. She led the man to a booth near the heater, the warmest spot in the diner. He sat carefully, his bony hands resting on the tabletop, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Then, without a word, she disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs, thick-cut toast, and crispy bacon, a meal meant for warmth, not just hunger. Eat, she said softly. The old man stared at the plate. His hands hovered over it, hesitant as if afraid the moment might vanish if he reached for it. Then slowly, he picked up the fork. The first bite was slow, almost reverent. His sunken cheeks moved carefully, savoring the taste. He chewed, swallowed, then closed his eyes for a long moment. Sarah turned away before he could thank her. She didn't need it. She had done what she believed was right. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching. A few booths away, a young woman lowered her phone, her expression unreadable. She had recorded the whole thing, the kindness, the cruelty, the moment of quiet humanity. She hesitated, then typed a caption. This waitress fed a homeless man. Her boss wasn't happy. With a final tap, she hit upload. Sarah had no idea that within an hour, everything in her life was about to change. The diner hummed with low conversation and the clatter of dishes. The old man took another slow bite, his fingers still trembling as he gripped the fork. Sarah glanced at him from behind the counter, a small warmth settling in her chest. Then the air shifted. A sharp voice cut through the quiet like a whip. Sarah. The plates in Sarah's hands rattled as she flinched. She turned toward the sound, toward her manager, Mr. Dunlap, whose face had darkened with fury. He stormed forward, his footsteps heavy against the tile floor. Every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward them. What do you think you're doing? He barked, his voice echoing through the restaurant. Sarah swallowed, suddenly aware of the old man hunching lower into his booth. The warmth she had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold weight in her stomach. She started, but Dunlap cut her off. You think this is a charity, that we just give out free meals? His voice dripped with mockery, loud enough for everyone to hear. The old man flinched, pushing the plate away, as if he expected it to be snatched from him at any second. Sir, he's hungry, Sarah said, her voice steady but quiet. It was just one meal. I'll cover the cost if you'll cover the cause. Dunlap let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, you'll cover it out of what paycheck exactly? Sarah stiffened. Your paycheck, gone. His words landed like a slap, sharp and merciless. The diner fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman near the counter frowned, but said nothing. A man in a business suit quietly placed his napkin on his plate, grabbed his coat, and left without a word. Sarah felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she refused to let the tears fall. She wouldn't break, not in front of him. Understood, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dunlap scoffed, shaking his head as he turned away. This is exactly why people like that take advantage. You give them something for free, they'll keep coming back like stray dogs. The old man flinched, as if he'd been struck. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly like this? If you believe kindness should always be protected, hit subscribe to Zoya Creation right now, because stories like this need to be heard. She wanted to scream, to tell Dunlap he was wrong, that kindness wasn't a transaction, that not everything had to be about profit, but she knew it wouldn't matter. People like him never listened. Instead, she turned back to the old man, her voice softening. It's okay, she reassured him. Loyalty, she reassured him. Finish your meal, but he didn't. He slowly pushed the plate away, his appetite gone. Across the diner, a man who had been sitting quietly in the corner lowered his phone. He had been recording. Someone had just captured everything. Sarah didn't see it. She was too focused on keeping herself together, on swallowing the lump in her throat. The man glanced at his screen, his brows furrowing as he replayed the clip. Then, with a decisive breath, he tapped his screen and hit upload. The atmosphere in the diner remained tense, but gradually conversations resumed. Plates clinked, and the low murmur of voices filled the space again. But Sarah felt the shift. She moved numbly, clearing tables and refilling coffee cups, avoiding the customers' glances. She could feel their pity, their hesitation. The ones who agreed with Dunlap said nothing, but neither did the ones who didn't, until someone did. A woman at the far end of the counter stood up. "Excuse me," she called. Dunlap, who had been pouring himself a cup of coffee behind the counter, barely glanced up. "Put my meal on my bill." Silence. Dunlap set the coffee pot down with a hard clink. "That's not necessary," he said flatly. The woman's expression didn't waver. "I think it is." A murmur rippled through the other customers. Another man raised his hand. "I'll cover it." "Me too." Another voice chimed in. Sarah blinked, stunned. Within seconds, nearly half the diner had offered to pay for a meal that had already been given. Dunlap's jaw tensed. He looked at them, then at Sarah, and scoffed. "Do what you want." He walked away as if the sight of it disgusted him. Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She turned back to the old man, who was staring at the growing crowd of people stepping forward. People who just minutes ago had sat in silence. His lips trembled, and when he looked up at her, his eyes shone. "Thank you," he whispered. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled. Outside, the night remained bitterly cold, but inside the diner, something was changing. Someone had recorded everything. The video was already spreading, and soon Sarah's act of kindness wouldn't just be seen by the people in that room. It would be seen by the entire town. Sarah didn't know. As she cleared plates and refilled coffee cups, her hands moved on autopilot, the echo of Dunlap's harsh words still ringing in her ears. The weight of the moment pressed heavy on her chest. She had done the right thing. She knew she had. So why did it feel like she was sinking? She didn't see the man in the corner pocket his phone after hitting upload. She didn't see the first wave of notifications lighting up screens across town. And she didn't hear the first murmurs of outrage beginning to spread like wildfire. Not yet. Across town, Tom Brady, a retired veteran, scrolled through his phone in his dimly lit living room. He expected the usual barrage of news updates, political debates and sports highlights. But then he saw it, a newly uploaded video. He tapped play. The footage was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone, but the scene was unmistakable. A young waitress kneeling beside an old homeless man, offering him food with a kind smile. The man hesitated, then accepted. Then the scene shifted. A manager stormed over, his voice rising. his anger spilling out for everyone to hear. "You think this is a charity? Your paycheck is gone." Tom's jaw clenched. He replayed the clip, watching as Sarah stood her ground, as the man flinched, and as the surrounding customers stayed silent. He scrolled through the comments. "Unbelievable. This is disgusting. That poor girl. Where is this diner? We need to do something." Tom didn't hesitate. He hit share and typed 4 words: "This is not okay." Then he grabbed his coat and keys. Inside the diner, Sarah wiped down a table, lost in thought. Then she felt it, a shift in the air. The bell above the door chimed, and a few customers turned their heads. Sarah looked up and froze. A small group of people had walked in, not just customers, locals and more were coming. Sarah's brows knitted together as she wiped her hands on her apron. Something felt off. She glanced at Dunlap, who was pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee, completely unaware. The front door chimed again and again. Within minutes, the diner was filled not just with customers, but with people who weren't there to eat, people who stood with their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. Then someone stepped forward. "Excuse me," a man said, his voice level but firm. "We'd like to speak with the waitress who helped the homeless man earlier." Sarah blinked. The air in the diner went still. Dunlap finally looked up, his brows furrowed. "And who are you?" he asked sharply. "Concerned citizens," the man answered. "We saw the video." Dunlap's face paled slightly. "Video?" But before he could demand more details, the door swung open once again, this time with a news crew. Sarah's stomach dropped. A woman holding a microphone walked in, her cameraman right behind her. The camera was already rolling. "We're here to cover the story that's been circulating online," the reporter said, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah. "Are you Sarah?" Sarah's throat went dry. Yes. Would you mind answering a few questions? People all over town are talking about your kindness and the reaction it received." Dunlap let out a sharp breath. "Absolutely not. You're disrupting business." A voice from the crowd cut him off. It was Tom Brady, the retired veteran, stepping forward, his face lined with quiet anger. He turned to the reporter. "You want to know about this place?" He gestured at Dunlap. "This man right here punished a girl for showing basic human decency, for feeding someone who was hungry." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. "She broke the rules," Dunlap snapped, but his voice wavered. Tom didn't flinch. "Then maybe your rules are the problem." Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears. The camera lens focused on her. The reporter leaned in slightly. "Sarah, how do you feel about what happened tonight?" Sarah swallowed. She looked at the old man who was still sitting quietly at the booth, his eyes wet with emotion. She looked at the people who had come, not for food but for her, and then she looked at Dunlap, who was shifting uncomfortably, sweat beading at his temple. Sarah took a slow breath. "I didn't do anything special," she said finally. "I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped." Silence, then applause. Not just from the people who had come in, but from customers, from strangers. And then the camera caught something else. Dunlap stepping back, his hands clenched, his face unreadable. The question now wasn't whether people supported Sarah, it was what Dunlap would do next. Outside, the night air was cold, but the town was on fire. Social media was exploding. The video had gone viral. Hundreds of people were commenting, sharing, reacting. "She deserves better. Fire Dunlap instead. Where is this place? I'm never eating there again." By the time the local news broadcast aired, it wasn't just the town talking about Sarah anymore, it was the entire country. Inside the diner, Dunlap's face was flushed red. He could feel the shift happening around him, the power slipping through his fingers. His gaze darted to Sarah, to the cameras, to the people standing against him. This was spiraling out of control. He opened his mouth, ready to snap, to take back control, but before he could, the door swung open one last time, and in walked another wave of townspeople. They weren't holding cameras, they weren't asking questions. They were here for something else entirely. And in that moment, Sarah knew this wasn't over. The tension in the diner was thick, suffocating. Sarah could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her. The news camera was still rolling, capturing everything, Her face, the crowd, the way Mr. Dunlap's jaw clenched tight enough to shatter glass. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. Sarah's words still lingered in the air. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped. A simple truth, a truth that had now reached hundreds, maybe thousands of people watching the news broadcast. Basil Dunlap scoffed, trying to reclaim his authority. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're all making a scene over nothing. This is my business, and I make the rules. A voice shot back from the crowd. And what kind of business punishes kindness? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Dunlap's nostrils flared, his frustration bubbling over. He turned on Sarah. You have no idea what kind of trouble you've started. Thanks to your little stunt, now I've got a mob in my restaurant. Sarah's hands tightened into fists, but before she could respond, the diner's doors swung open once again. This time the entire room fell silent. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive navy blue suit stepped inside. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket as he surveyed the room, his gaze settling on Sarah. Is she the one? He asked, his deep voice cutting through the hush. Tom Brady, the veteran who had led the charge, nodded. Yeah, she's the one. The man's sharp blue eyes shifted to Dunlap. And you're the owner? Dunlap squared his shoulders, straightening his tie as if to appear in control. That's right. Who's asking? The man stepped forward, extending a firm hand. Anderson! Richard Anderson. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah blinked. Richard Anderson, the Richard Anderson, owner of Anderson Hospitality Group, a chain of luxury hotels and high-end restaurants across the country. Yeah. Dunlap's smug expression flickered. Yeah. Mr. Anderson, I didn't realize that you were making a national embarrassment of yourself. Anderson finished for him. Trust me, you're realizing it now. Dunlap's face paled. Anderson ignored him and turned back to Sarah. His expression softened just slightly. I saw the video, he said, and I saw what you did. Sarah swallowed, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what to say. You remind me of someone, Anderson continued. My mother. She ran a small diner before I made my first million, and she had a rule: if someone's hungry, you feed them. No exceptions. Sarah's throat tightened. Anderson glanced at the old man still sitting in the booth, his plate now empty, his eyes wide with wonder at what was unfolding around him. Anderson's gaze softened further. You followed that rule tonight, he said, even when it cost you something. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. It just felt like the right thing to do. Anderson nodded. It was. Then he turned back to Dunlap, his entire demeanor shifting from warm to ice cold. And you? He asked, tilting his head. What exactly have you done tonight? Dunlap stammered. Look, I was just enforcing policy. You run businesses. You understand how important that is. I understand that there's a difference between policy and cruelty. Anderson cut him off. And I understand that there are two types of business owners, those who build their success on integrity and those who build it on fear. Tell me, which one do you think is still standing at the end of the day? Dunlap had no answer. Anderson let the silence hang for a moment, before exhaling, shaking his head. Unbelievable. Then he turned back to Sarah. I'm offering you a job. The room collectively inhaled. Sarah's mouth parted slightly. What? A management position at one of my restaurants. Better pay, better benefits. A boss who actually understands the meaning of decency. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her. A management position with Anderson Hospitality Group. This wasn't just any job offer. This was life-changing. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Anderson smiled slightly, as if he understood the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Take your time, he said, but let me be clear. People like you, we need more of them in this industry. The old man in the booth beamed. Tom Brady clapped a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder, grinning. The entire crowd broke into cheers. And Dunlap, he looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Sarah turned, searching his face, expecting another outburst, another angry tirade, but there was nothing, just the realization, the slow pain, full realization that he had lost. He cleared his throat. You know what? He muttered. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe we can just… Anderson raised a hand, silencing him with a single motion. We're done here. Dunlap pressed his lips together, his face red with humiliation. He stormed past Anderson, past Sarah, and disappeared into the back office. The moment he was gone, the room erupted again. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tom nudged her. Well, Sarah looked at Anderson, still stunned. Then slowly she smiled. I accept. The cheers grew louder. The old man wiped his eyes. Sarah looked around the room, at the faces of strangers who had stood up for her, at the kindness that had multiplied far beyond anything she ever expected. Her act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, and she knew in that moment that it had all been worth it. The town had come together for her, and now her life was about to change forever. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, barely able to process what had just happened. The cheers around her felt like a distant echo, as if she were floating outside of her own body, watching it all unfold from afar. Her entire life, she had been told that kindness didn't pay the bills, that rules were rules, that she had to look out for herself first. But now she had just been offered a future she never even dared to dream of, all because she refused to ignore a hungry man on a cold night. I accept, she had said, barely recognizing her own voice, and with those two words, everything changed. The morning after, the entire town was talking about her. The video had spread far beyond their small community. It had reached news stations, social media influencers, and even national headlines. Kindness comes at a cost until a dozen waitresses were fired for feeding a homeless man. Then this happened, a lesson in compassion. What this small town did will restore your faith in humanity. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly, notifications piling up faster than she could read them. Strangers from all over the country sent messages of support. Some shared their own stories, times they had helped someone and faced consequences. Others simply thanked her for reminding them that there was still good in the world. Anderson's office called first thing in the morning. Are you ready? His assistant asked. We have a manager's position waiting for you. Your new life starts today. Sarah hesitated for the briefest of moments, then she smiled. I'm ready. Meanwhile, the diner where it all started was eerily quiet. Dunlap stood in his office, scrolling through news articles with a scowl. His restaurant was now infamous for all the wrong reasons. His phone had rung off the hook that morning, but not with the usual reservation requests. Instead, it had been reporters, critics, angry locals calling to say they'd never eat there again. Even his most loyal customers had turned their backs, and for the first time in his career, Dunlap realized something. Reputation was everything.